Hi everyone. Welcome to the video for the Chronbach's Alpha activity that you need to complete early this week. Chronbach's Alpha is a measure of internal reliability like we talked about earlier in the semester, and it's very relevant to the scales that you are collecting data for your group project surveys. So even though it's not part of NNS Chapter 5, we do introduce it now as you're getting ready to finish up your proposals and create your Qualtrics surveys, all of which we're going to work together through over the next week so that we can all start to get your data collection going. But for now, we're going to focus on practicing Chronbach's Alpha. So there's an activity and a slide set. I haven't posted a video for that particular slide set, but you should go take a look. But this activity walks through the different things that we're doing for Chronbach's Alpha. So let's take a look at this activity. The first page of it has some background information that's very similar to the slide set, kind of reintroducing Chronbach's Alpha and why we're doing it. I'm going to try and keep this video as short as possible. You'll be able to revisit the video, watch it when you need to, right? So you'll always have this to come back to. So keep that in mind. Page 2 has the specific instructions in order to answer the different questions and things that you want to think about when you're running Chronbach's Alpha. The goal is that you end up with an average measure or a sum, depending on how the particular scale is asked you to score it. But we're always going to be doing averages on this example, right? After we determine which questions should be part of that final measure. So I'm going to walk through the first example with you. There's 4 total scales, but we're going to do the first one in this video here. So follow along, or watch it once and then go back and do it again as you watch it a second time. So this is the first scale. It's a gratitude questionnaire. It has 6 questions, and it's on a Likert scale from 1 to 7, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Now, a very important thing to pay attention to is that we have 2 reverse scored items. That means those questions are flipped in terms of the direction of the scale. Let's take a look at what I mean. So question 1, I have so much in life to be thankful for. If they're a very grateful person, they're probably going to mark toward the higher end of the scale. If they're not, they're probably going to mark toward the lower end of the scale. Question 2 is worded in the same direction. If they're very grateful, they're probably going to mark high. If not, they're probably going to mark somewhat low. Now let's take a look at our first reverse coded question. When I look at the world, I don't see much to be grateful for. In this case, they're going to answer opposite to how they have before, right? If they're very grateful, they're probably going to disagree with that statement. If they're not, they're probably going to agree. So in order to get an accurate reflection of how grateful this person is, we want to flip the scale for those questions that are asked in a reverse direction. Now, the reason we do this, right, is to avoid things like the response set that we talked about a few weeks ago, where somebody just says, oh, I'm just going to mark 6 for everything after they read the first couple of questions, right? In this case, they're forced to really actually look at each question a little bit more accurately and answer in the appropriate direction for each question. But in order to get the final measure we want to make sure that we're putting all these things in the same directional scale. So let's take a look at how to calculate Chronbach's Alpha step by step, starting with reverse coding our questions. So I've already loaded the data here in Jamovi. If you don't have Jamovi on your personal computers, now is a good time to make that happen. And if you're having any issues or questions with that, please get in touch with me. We'll make sure that you have access to Jamovi at home for the rest of the semester. And again, this data file that you have here is an SPSS file, so it's really important that you actually go and open it using this option directly in Jamovi. If you just try and double click on the file you downloaded, it's going to try and open SPSS. It's going to make everything kind of shut down. So do open it directly in Jamovi. But when you do, you should see that we have a lot of data for all the questions for those different scales that we have in this activity. But these first 6 questions are the gratitude scale, GRAT 1 through 6. So we need to reverse code questions 3 and question 6. I'm going to show you how to do this manually, and I want you to be able to do this, but when we get to the full analysis part of it, I'm going to show you a shortcut that will come in handy when you're not doing it, for example, on a homework or on an exam where you have to show your work. So I'm going to show you both options here. But let's start off reverse coding 3 and 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight GRAT 3. That's our first question we need to reverse code. And I'm going to go to this compute option here. If I click on that, it's going to let us add a column with new data. Let's call it GRAT 3 RC for GRAT 3 reverse code. Now, in order to reverse code, we need to subtract their score for that question from 1 more than the length of the Likert scale. So in this case, we have 1 to 7. So we're going to do 8 minus GRAT 3. Now, a common mistake here is that people will subtract from the number of questions, but it's the length of the Likert scale. So it's always 8, in this case, minus the question. If the Likert scale was 1 to 6, we would do 7 minus that question. If the Likert scale was 1 to 4, we would do 5 minus that question. So it's always 1 more than the length of the scale minus their score on that question. So in this case, right, Likert scale is 1 to 7. Let's do 8 minus GRAT 3, right? Now you want to make sure that when you put in that variable name, it's the same as it is here. So we've spelled it the same there. And there we go. So you can see that this person's score of 5 gets switched to 3. So they went from scoring 2 below the high end to 2 above the low end. So we've successfully flipped the direction of that scale, right? And it does that automatically for each subject. So let's do this for GRAT 6 as well. So again, you can go to compute. Let's call it GRAT 6 RC. And again, it's 8 minus, now in this case, GRAT 6. So now we have our reverse coded items here. Now it's time to calculate Chronbach's alpha for the scale. So let's go to analyses. And in this case, instead of going directly to ESCI like we have before, we need to go to factor. This is part of Jamovi. So if you download Jamovi, you will have this just built in. And the first option under factor is reliability analysis. So let's click on that. What you want to do is make sure that under scale statistics, you have Chronbach's alpha checked. It should be the default, but just in case. And then you want to also ask it to give you Chronbach's alpha if an item is dropped and the item rest correlation. Now let's add in our questions here. So we're going to pull over 1, 2, and then instead of 3, we're going to bring over reverse coded 3 because question 3 itself is in the wrong direction. Let's do 4, 5, and then reverse coded 6, right? So now we can start taking a look at what we have for our scale. So if we look over here, our Chronbach's alpha is 0.942. Now remember, this is all based on correlation. So this is very high. This would be very good internal reliability of this scale. We would look at this and feel very good that our questions are reliable and that the scale is all, in general, working on the same construct that we're interested in. So overall, you would say this is very good internal reliability if you had to judge this Chronbach's alpha value. But let's go take a look at our item reliability statistics. So this breaks down for each question what its correlation with the rest of the questions is on its own. And then it gives you Chronbach's alpha if you removed that question altogether. So let's take a look. Let's find the worst one, because one of the questions we're supposed to answer here is which one is the worst. So if you look at the item rest correlation, the one with the lowest number here is the one that correlates the least with the other questions on the scale. So it looks like GRAT 5 here at 0.556 is the lowest of these options. So let's take a look at that question and see if we can think about why it's lower than the others. So question 5 says, as I get older, I can see beneficence in the people, events, and situations that have been part of my life history. Now, if you look at the slide set related to this, and when we talked about survey building before, there's different things that you can look for, right? And so there's maybe a couple potential issues you can think about here. One, the wording might be a little complicated, right? Maybe not everyone knows what beneficence is, and so they might be confused in terms of what direction they might want to answer that question. And it's also asking you about people, events, and situations all in the same question. So maybe there's a little bit of complicatedness to this question, and maybe you could even say that it's double-barreled if you would think that people, events, and situations could have different answers for a given person, right? So that could be something that's going on here. So let's take a look at what would happen if we just removed this question altogether. Again, this is a very high initial Chronbach's alpha, so we probably wouldn't mess with this scale, but for the sake of illustration, let's say we would remove item 5. If we did, Chronbach's alpha would go up to 0.973, right? So it would go from 0.942 to 0.973, so it would go up. You'll notice that for the other questions that all have very high kind of single item correlations, that if we removed any of those, Chronbach's alpha would actually go down. So we would definitely not remove those questions. In general, if you have to make a decision, if you need to remove a question or not, you would always want to see how much change you have. In this case, we're already very good. We probably wouldn't want to remove this question. If it would make your Chronbach's alpha go up a lot, then you would want to consider removing that question. If this was a pilot test, right, where we were going to then revise our scale, then you could say we could think about rewording this question, maybe think of a different word other than beneficence to use, or maybe separating people, events, and situations into different questions, right? But if you don't have that option, then we need to think about whether or not we want to remove it. I'm going to say in this case, let's not remove it, okay, because we're not going to move our Chronbach's alpha a lot. But in the other examples, you'll need to decide whether or not you want to remove an item or not. So let's see what we should do next here. In this case, we're ready to actually make the average for this scale. So to do this, we need to compute yet another new column. So we're going to take the average of each individual's response to these questions. So let's compute a new column and call it, there we go, average graph, right? So we're going to take the average of the gratitude scale. So in order to do this, we have to calculate the mean. So let's actually put this in. So we can tell Jamovi to add each of these together. Again, you want to be careful to include the questions that are reverse coded where applicable. So I included reverse 3 or GRAT reverse coded for 3, and I will for 6 as well, instead of the original questions, right? And remember, those parentheses are important. So we're going to sum up those 6 questions and then divide by 6, right? Now, I'll mention if we had removed GRAT 5 because we thought that that was going to be a big enough change in Chronbach's alpha, then when you create the average, we would have not included GRAT 5 here, and we would divide by 5. So you always want to make sure that you're dividing by the right number of final questions that you want in the variable that you're creating. All right, so now we have a column for our average GRAT scores. So for each individual, their average on those 6 questions. Now we can actually calculate the mean of our final variable that we want to using PSYC like we have before. So we can go to PSYC, estimate mean, and we can get this for that average GRAT score. So we can see that we have our mean, our 95% confidence interval, our standard deviation, everything that we would want to, like we've calculated before. So now you can interpret the mean of the gratitude scale. Pretty cool, right? Now I want to show you one other thing quickly, and that is I'm going to start this factor analysis again and show you a little bit of a shortcut, right? So I showed you, and again, you need to be able to do the reverse coding on your own. But let's say you didn't have to show that work for whatever reason, right? I want to show you that we could just put the original questions in here, right? So I'm putting GRAT 1, do GRAT 6 over here, right? And you'll always want to get the Chronbach's alpha if item is dropped and the item rest correlation. But now there's this option down here that says reverse scaled items. And if you put over into the reverse scaled items column down here, you'll notice that it makes a little note and it reverse scales them. And it actually now gives you the same thing without you having to do that manually. We do want you to be able to do it manually, so you need to know the process we worked through. But if you didn't have to do it manually, you could use that little shortcut, right? You can even check it's the same numbers that we had up there. And you can also ask in this factor option to give you a mean. The reason that we need to go to PSYC when you have your final average scale is so that you get the confidence interval. But let's just check and make sure that our analysis using that little shortcut gives us the same overall mean. And it does 2.49, which is the same mean that we got here, right? So that's a little shortcut to keep in mind, but for this activity, please practice reverse coding those items. That will be part of what we ask you to do as we work toward the next exam. So I do want you to be familiar with that, right? So let's go through and make sure we addressed these different questions. So we looked at the initial internal reliability, very good internal reliability of the scale. We identified item 5 as the worst, right? We talked about how that inner item type correlation, that's the item rest correlation, right, tells us that. And then we also could look at if the item is dropped, that the Chronbach's alpha does go up. So both of those helped us understand why that item was problematic. And looking at the text, we noticed that maybe it was a little complicated. Maybe there was some double-barreled aspects there, right? And if we were doing a pilot test and could reword it, we would make it more simple. We might remove those 3 things from the one question into separate questions, right? Make it less double-barreled. And then if we simply deleted the item, that internal reliability, like we said, did go up, right? Not very much. It was already really good, so we didn't remove that question, but it would go up if we removed it, so it would stay very, very good. And there's really nothing else to remove from this, right? So for this scale, none of the other questions were particularly bad, right? For the other scales that you work through on your own, right, you'll want to notice what the worst one is, but also you'll want to take a look at whether there's any more that are problematic. Generally, for these individual item correlations, anything that's high positive is going to be fine, right? But you'll want to take a look at that. I'm going to post a key for this activity later in the week, right? So you can kind of examine your thought process versus my thought process, but use your best judgment as you go through this for the first time, right? Does this item need to be removed? Does it not? Right? And we also decided that we weren't going to remove an item for this, so we calculated an overall score using all 6 questions. If we had removed item 5, we would have summed up the remaining questions and divided by 5, but we decided to keep all of them. And then we used PSYC to calculate our descriptive stats like you've done now many, many times. So that's a lot. It's one example. Now, right, using this, try and work through the other scales that we have here. So there's a curiosity inventory, tells you what items are reverse scored. There's a personal growth initiative scale with 9 questions on a scale from 1 to 6. And there's Zung's self-rating anxiety scale, which has 20 questions on a scale from 1 to 4. Now, one of these 3 scales doesn't tell you if there's any reverse coded items or not. I want you to run Chronbach's alpha first, and then based on that, you should be able to see which items need to be reverse coded. So this is a way for you to see that sometimes if you don't have information about reverse coding, you should still check and make sure that the items are all scored in the same direction. So work through this activity. I'm going to post this video on the discussion board for you to see, right? And ask questions if anything comes up. Again, like I mentioned in my long announcement earlier today, there's going to be some bumps, right? But we can work through this together. I hope to have a Zoom drop-in session on Wednesday during our regular class time. So if you notice, there's now a Zoom link on Canvas. And I hope that making sure that all that works, that whenever I tell you a time when I'm going to be available for you to drop in, you'll be able to just click on that link in Canvas and it should bring you right to a live room where I'm there and you can ask questions and we can work through problems together. But that's going to be part of the bumpy road as we all get used to working in this online environment. So thanks for sticking with me. Again, you can watch this video as many times as you want. You'll probably want to mute me because you're tired of hearing my voice, but you can at least follow through the steps that I did so that you can know how to do this on your own. That is all we have for now. So I will be back maybe with more videos this week, although I think we can get through a lot of this on the discussion boards. But I will continue to do this for activities where it works for us to walk through an example together. Other activities may be that you can just jump right in on your own. But please let me know if this is helpful or not, and we'll continue to make the best of our new interesting day-to-day situation. Stay healthy, stay home. Talk to you soon.